Stand down your guards, Commodore. You will not raise a hand in this chamber. The Arbiter's command cut across the council floor like a blade striking iron. Commodore Ryland Voss did not move, his hands pressed into the arms of his chair, the leather slick beneath his palms from sweat he refused to acknowledge. He could feel the weight of 100 delegations fixed upon him, some curious, some openly hostile, and a few deliberately turning their eyes away, as if refusal to witness might absolve their silence. The hall resembled a cathedral of judgment, balconies carved from stone older than human history, banners sagging in stale air heavy with incense, and the bitter tang of oxidized copper. At the center, a raised dais stood like a throne, and above it glowed a wall-sized laser plasma display, its surface alive with shifting indictments. Alien script flickered across the panel and was rendered into Terran glyphs that hammered each charge into every listening ear. Unauthorized colonization, militarization beyond accord, concealment of weapons research, destabilization of frontier systems. You are charged with reckless expansion that endangers the balance of this council, the Arbiter intoned, his voice amplified until it rattled the chamber's vaulted ceiling. You are accused of concealing weapons programs whose scale dwarfs those of elder civilizations. You are guilty of arrogance unfit for a species so newly arrived among the stars. Ryland rose slowly. The fabric of his uniform clung to his back, heat pressed tight beneath his collar. He wanted to shout, to spit contempt at these ancient rulers who feared humanity's progress, but he forced the impulse down until his voice carried only ice. You speak of arrogance while entire sectors starve under tariffs your monopolies impose. You strip our trade routes, demand our submission, and call our survival aggression. If defending our people is arrogance, then I will carry that guilt without apology. The chamber stirred with murmurs. Delegates leaned to whisper, robes brushing stone, claws tapping railings. A reptilian envoy hissed sharp phrases to its neighbor. An insectoid with glassy eyes clicked mandibles in theatrical disdain. A few of the younger civilization's representatives bowed their heads, shame flickering across their postures. They knew Earth's defense was not entirely false, but they also knew that speaking in its favor would mark them next for isolation. You dare lecture us in our hall, the Arbiter snapped, long fingers hovering above the control console. Earth entered by invitation. That invitation can be withdrawn. Voss let silence stretch until even the banners seemed to sag under its weight. When he spoke, he aimed his words not at the Arbiter, but at the recorders transmitting to every star system beyond these walls. Withdraw it then, but understand what you reveal in doing so. You are not protecting peace, you are protecting privilege. You fear what we may become, and in your fear you confess your weakness. The Arbiter's hand struck the console. A resonant chime rolled through the chamber. The plasma display erupted in crimson light, glyphs rewriting into a sentence etched across every channel of the galaxy. Earth membership terminated. All recognition withdrawn. All colonies to be treated as unaligned and without protection. The words were law, and with that declaration, every human station and every frontier world was stripped of immunity. The smell of heated circuitry bit at the nose. Somewhere in the balconies, an envoy spat in contempt, the sound carrying further than intended. Soldiers in lacquered armor advanced, weapons low but unmistakable. Humanity had not simply been dismissed, it had been condemned. Voss straightened until his back was rigid with defiance. "Then it is finished," he said, tone devoid of theatrics, his expression carved into something the council would not forget. He let his gaze pass across the chamber one last time, memorizing the faces of those who had chosen silence over courage. Their cowardice would remain with him longer than the jeers of his enemies. As he turned to depart, a younger delegate, scaled, trembling, rose from a lower bench. "Commodore," it called, voice brittle but desperate, "do not mistake all of us for their verdict." Guards shoved it back into its seat before more words could escape. The Arbiter's eyes burned with irritation, and the hall closed back into the mask of authority. Outside, the corridors reeked of dust and incense, the walls lined with mosaics celebrating centuries of order that now felt hollow. Voss walked with measured pace, his escort of human officers clustering around him, faces pale yet eyes burning with questions they dared not voice beneath the watch of alien guards. Only when they reached the shuttle bay did Lieutenant Marek break the silence, his voice unsteady. "Sir, if recognition is gone, our colonies, they will be prey," Voss said, tightening his gloves until the fabric strained against his fists. "The Council has cut us loose so others may carve us apart. They mistake our exile for surrender. They will discover that survival without their chains makes us more dangerous than they imagine." The shuttle ramp hissed open, light spilling across deck plates scuffed by countless landings. The sharp tang of coolant and scorched insulation lingered in the air. As Voss climbed aboard, he caught his reflection in the cockpit glass, eyes shadowed with fatigue yet hardened with resolve. He sank into the command chair, the vibration of awakening systems thrumming up through his boots, and spoke with a voice meant to carry far beyond the bay, into every corner of Earth's fleet. "Transmit to the Secretariat. From this moment forward, we stand alone. If they believe banishment erases us, let history remind them what happens when a people forced into silence learns to answer in thunder. Contact lost with Caraway Station. Last signal shows forced docking." The report landed in Commodore Ryland Voss's briefing chamber like a hammer blow. His officers stood around the circular table where a heads-up display projected the rim sectors, a scattering of human colonies blinking red as communication links fell silent one by one. The air smelled faintly of recycled coolant drifting from overworked air vents, a mechanical sharpness that clung to the tongue. Every man in that room felt the weight of exile tightening into something more tangible: predation. Lieutenant Marek, pale but steady, expanded the Caraway report. Council patrol ships approached under inspection authority. They boarded with assault teams, disarmed the garrison, declared the station illegal, and seized civilian transports. Hundreds were taken. Records show they invoked Article 4, the right to claim resources from unrecognized entities. His throat caught on the last phrase. Voss did not sit. His eyes swept the glowing map, each fading beacon marking families left vulnerable. He spoke in measured cadence, his voice dragging the silence with it. "This is not policing. This is the first slice of dismemberment. They believe without Council protection, we are carrion for scavengers. Every raid they sanction is a test of our will." A veteran officer, Commander Brask, slammed his fist against the table's rim, rattling the displays. "We can't cover every outpost. They'll cut the rim to pieces before we mobilize. We need a counterblow." "And invite the charge of rebellion?" Marek's words snapped back, brittle with frustration. "That's what they want. Proof that we are lawless so they can descend without restraint." "They've already descended," Brask growled. "Call it what it is." Voss cut across them both, his voice low but undeniable. "We answer where we must, but not with blind fury. We will not hand them justification, but neither will we allow our people to be butchered." He leaned closer to the table, his reflection fractured across the heads-up display, eyes ringed with exhaustion but burning with decision. "We choose the ground. We choose the time." The chamber's air seemed to shrink around those words. Men shifted their boots against the deck plating, the scrape of rubber against alloy carrying louder than speech. They all understood what his restraint concealed. Fury sharpened into strategy. Hours later, the first distress call from an outer colony bled through the comms. The transmission carried screaming in the background, the dull roar of weapons fire, and a station governor shouting into the void. "They've cut through the east lock. Families barricaded," before static devoured his words. The control room filled with noise, alarms, overlapping requests, and the panicked shuffle of aides. "Route the call to Fleet Command," Voss ordered, his voice ablade, slicing chaos. His officers snapped to motion, data flooding across the heads-up displays. Council frigates boarding a civilian hub, civilian militia hopelessly outmatched. Within minutes, images arrived, grainy recordings captured by dock cameras before they were destroyed. Armored aliens swept corridors with rifles, civilians dragged from shelters, children crying as their parents were forced into shuttles. The sound of boots on steel echoed through the speakers, each impact a drumbeat of helplessness. Voss turned to his command staff. "Every colony hears of Caraway, of Tanith, of stations falling like dominoes. If we do not act, morale will collapse before a single fleet arrives at Earth. His gaze locked on Brask. Scramble interceptor squadrons. Send them to intercept the transports outbound. We may not hold the station, but we will not let our people vanish into their cages. When the interceptors reached the target, the battle was short and brutal. Human pilots dove through crossfire, missile trails painting streaks of fire across the black. One frigate exploded, shattering into incandescent fragments. Another limped into retreat. But two transports escaped with their prisoners, and the human squadron returned with half its number lost. The comms carried the voices of surviving pilots, cracked with grief yet hard with resolve. Back aboard his flagship, Voss addressed them all. Every life matters. Every loss cuts us. But we will not fold. You are the proof that exile does not erase defiance. Carry that fire home and carry it to the next battle, because there will be more. That night, reports streamed in from across the rim. Trade convoys stopped and stripped, colonies raided, supply routes severed. Voss read them alone, his quarters dim except for the glow of the display painting his features in cold light. His jaw clenched. He whispered words meant only for himself, yet carried by the walls. They are bleeding us slow. They want fear to finish what fleets begin. But fear is not the chain they think it is. He slept little, and when he did, his dreams carried the echo of station alarms and the sight of civilians dragged through airlocks. Morning brought another briefing, and with it confirmation that the Council intended to enforce a full blockade of Seoul within weeks. Voss stood before his officers, spine rigid, every word carved by fatigue yet sharpened by fury. We cannot guard every outpost, we cannot save every convoy, but we can make them pay for each raid until they learn that cutting pieces from us costs more than they gain. We will not play the prey they imagine. If they believe exile makes us easy harvest, we will teach them the taste of ash. The room held its breath. Every officer there, hardened and scarred by years of quiet service, now felt the fire of something different. War without pretense. The meeting ended with assignments delivered like verdicts. Convoys armed, decoys deployed, frontier fleets instructed to scatter and strike when chance allowed. Men filed out with grim purpose, the air filled with the scent of heated circuitry and the scrape of boots against steel. The sound of a people preparing not for rescue, but for survival. By the time the last officer departed, Voss remained alone in the chamber. The heads-up display still showed the rim sectors, but now more colonies blinked red than green. He reached out, resting his hand against the shifting light, and whispered not to his staff or to the council, but to the families whose lives flickered within those points of light. Hold on. Your names are not forgotten. Your suffering is not silent. They believe they are dismantling us, but they are building the storm that will drown them. They've declared blockade operations within 3 weeks. That gives us 20 days to either surrender or reveal what we've hidden. Commodore Ryland Voss's words cut across the War Council chamber, where senior officers and government envoys filled the air with the rustle of uniforms, the scrape of chairs, and the murmur of conflicting demands. The chamber lights glared against the polished table, reflecting fractured images of men who understood they were deciding whether humanity would live chained or die standing. Minister Ardon, a civilian voice elevated by politics rather than service, leaned forward, his hands trembling against the tabletop. Commodore, our colonies cannot endure another caraway. We must negotiate. Perhaps if we cede frontier stations, if we pay restitution, they might relent. Brask, the battle-scarred commander seated opposite him, erupted with a snarl. Relent? You saw what they did at Tanith. They don't want restitution, they want eradication. Offer them a hand and they'll take your throat. Voss let the clash play out a moment, studying the men as the scent of burned coffee from half-empty cups mingled with the sharper tang of overheated circuitry from the heads-up displays. He finally spoke, his voice low, deliberate, carrying across the room without need for volume. The Council does not bargain in good faith. Every concession becomes the next stepping stone for conquest. We cannot out-argue them, we cannot outvote them, so we must outlast them. That is why Obsidian exists. The room quieted. The word had been whispered in corridors for years, but few had ever heard it confirmed. Voss keyed the central control. The chamber darkened, and the laser plasma display filled the air with the map of Sol's outer sectors and beyond. Slowly, hidden markers began to flicker. Asteroid belts glowing with dormant power grids, refueling depots disguised as mining stations, encrypted relays buried inside ice moons, listening posts camouflaged as abandoned wreckage. The officers leaned forward, faces illuminated in red and gold as forgotten shadows of preparation came to light. Obsidian was conceived the moment we entered this council, Voss said. We knew this day would come, the day when acceptance would end, when fear of us would outweigh profit from us. So we hid what we could not openly build. Civilian contracts concealed armaments, mining consortia doubled as fortresses. Colonists volunteered to live above shells that were never truly mines but bunkers with teeth. For decades, they thought us naive. We let them believe it. Marek spoke softly, almost reverently. So all this time, we were digging not for ore, but for survival. Survival, Voss affirmed, and deterrence. Every world they attempt to seize must taste blood in return. They will not stop, but they must bleed faster than we do. If they believe exile leaves us defenseless, let Obsidian prove otherwise. Brask allowed himself a grim smile. Then it's time to wake the dead. Orders spread like wildfire. Forgotten garrisons received coded transmissions. Abandoned stations came alive with power. Relay towers lit up across the rim. Crews who had mined rock in obscurity for decades suddenly unpacked sealed crates containing weapons they had trained on in secret drills. The sound of drills striking bolts, the hiss of long-dormant hatches, the heavy clatter of magazines slamming into rifles filled the void. Men who had thought themselves miners or haulers stepped forward as soldiers, their eyes carrying the knowledge that they were the hidden wall between Earth and annihilation. The first test of Obsidian came within days. A Council destroyer prowling near the Helix Belt detected what it believed to be an abandoned refueling platform. It moved in for seizure, confident and unhurried. From the platform's outer skin, disguised panels cracked open and mass drivers roared, slamming tungsten rods through the destroyer's flank. The alien vessel staggered, fires blooming across its surface, before vanishing into scattered fragments that shimmered briefly against the cold. The platform's commander sent only 3 words back to Earth. Obsidian confirmed effective. When the report reached Voss, he stood silently for a moment, the voices of his staff buzzing around him like static. Then he spoke to the fleet officers gathered. They will adapt quickly. We cannot rely on surprise alone. Every strike we make must serve 2 purposes, survival and message. The message is simple. Banish us if you wish, but do not mistake us for prey. That night, Voss walked the length of his flagship's observation deck. The stars stretched before him, cold pinpricks that gave no comfort, yet each one represented lives he had sworn to shield. He remembered the faces of the children dragged from Caraway, their screams still burned into recordings smuggled back. He remembered the hollow voice of Tanith's governor as the transmission died. Every failure pressed against him, each a stone in the burden he carried, yet each also hardened his resolve. An ensign on night watch, unaware of his presence, muttered to a fellow officer by the railing, "If exile is the end, at least we'll make them choke on it." The words were rough, almost bitter, but Voss found them more honest than any speech. He approached, the men startled into rigid salute, but he raised a hand to still them. "Do not carry bitterness alone," Voss told them. His tone softened, carrying the weight of command laced with the gravity of a man who had walked through fire. "Carry duty. Anger burns out, but duty remains. It is duty that will keep us alive when anger cannot." The ensign swallowed hard and nodded, the reflection of starlight glinting in his eyes. By dawn, convoys were armed, false signals spread to confuse enemy patrols, and hidden bases pulsed with power for the first time in decades. Humanity had been forced from the council chamber in shame, but within the silence of exile, it had birthed a network of fangs. And though Ryland Voss knew the blood cost would climb with every engagement, he also knew that survival now belonged not to words spoken in ancient halls, but to actions written in fire across the rim. "Another convoy gutted at the rim, sir. Survivors say the council fleet never even opened negotiations. They went straight to boarding." The report arrived before dawn, delivered by a junior officer whose voice shook as though each word carried its own weight of grief. Commodore Ryland Voss stood at the observation deck, staring into the scatter of stars, their cold light reflecting against the glass and tracing the deep lines around his eyes. Behind him, the command center pulsed with movement, men rushing across consoles, the dry hiss of recycled air mixing with the bite of overheated wiring. Every sense screamed that the blockade was tightening, link by link, as the Council sought to strangle Earth before it could gather strength. Voss did not turn. How many lost this time? 374 civilians, 12 escort craft destroyed. One managed to limp home with half its hull open. The answer hung in the air like smoke that refused to clear. Officers at nearby consoles lowered their heads, fingers slowing over controls, each man silently adding another name to the endless tally that haunted them. Voss finally faced the room, his gaze sweeping across the crew. His voice, quiet but edged like tempered steel, carried through the chamber. Every raid they stage is not just an attack on lives, but an attack on hope. If we let despair take hold, they will win without firing another shot. Brask stepped forward from the tactical console, his heavy shoulders hunched from too many sleepless nights. We can't fight them ship for ship. Their fleets outnumber ours 5-1. We must bleed them in shadows, hit them where they never expected, and vanish before they can strike back. Voss nodded once. Then shadows will be our ally. The war that followed was not glorious. It was dirty, exhausting, and fought in the silence of cold corridors and empty belts. Human frigates lay dormant inside asteroid fields, their hulls disguised as rock, waiting for Council convoys to drift into range. When the moment came, the silence erupted into fire. Mass drivers unleashing slugs that ripped through alien transports, missile racks roaring as though tearing the very dark apart. The smell of scorched insulation filled every cabin. The sting of sweat rolled down brows, men biting their tongues until blood salted their mouths as they braced against sudden maneuvers. Every ambush carried a price. Council escorts struck back with ruthless efficiency, hunting survivors like wolves. Human squadrons often returned limping, hulls torn, air scrubbers fouled with smoke. Medbays filled with men screaming as burns seared across their skin, the sound of cauterizers cutting through the chaos. In the mess halls, silence reigned, broken only by the scrape of trays and the hollow laughter of those who survived when others had not. Marek delivered the casualty reports each evening, his voice steady, but his eyes darkening with each passing day. We intercepted 2 patrol groups near the inner belt, destroyed both, but we lost 8 ships to hold the field long enough to finish them. Voss forced himself to study each report, line by line, the names of lost crews pressing into his memory until he could recite them without looking. He would not allow numbers to become abstractions. Send commendations to every family. Tell them their sons and brothers bought us time. We will make that time count. But time proved merciless. The Council adapted. They began sending decoy convoys, baiting human ambushes into traps. At Charon Ridge, 3 squadrons were obliterated when alien warships emerged from hidden positions, cutting off every escape vector. Survivors screamed into comms until their channels went dark. The echo of those final cries reached Earth's command center, like knives twisting into already open wounds. In a late-night meeting, Brask slammed his fist into the table so hard the sound cracked across the chamber. We can't keep trading lives like this, Commodore. If this continues, we'll have no fleet left to defend Seoul. Voss did not flinch. His voice was measured, though his knuckles whitened where he gripped the chair. You think I don't count every soul we lose? But surrender hands them our colonies without contest. Attrition is brutal, but it is the only path that denies them their feast. The chamber filled with silence, broken only by the hiss of the coffee pot overworked in the corner and the dull hum of filters pushing tired air through the ducts. Then Marek spoke, his tone weary yet carrying conviction. The men still believe in you, sir. They'll keep fighting so long as they think you're fighting beside them. But they need victories that can be seen, not only statistics of losses. That night, Voss sat alone in his quarters. The room smelled faintly of old leather and engine coolant, the lights dim, shadows stretching across the walls. He poured himself a glass of water, the rim trembling in his grasp, and stared at his reflection in the liquid. He whispered words not for staff or officers, but for the ghosts that lingered. I ask you to die and you obey. I promise you nothing but pain, and still you fight. Forgive me. Forgive the necessity. At dawn, the fleet mobilized again. This time the ambush struck deeper, closer to the heart of the blockade. Human frigates, stripped of insignia, slipped past enemy patrols, hiding their signatures within fields of drifting debris. When the Council's carrier group entered the sector, Voss gave the order himself. Fire! What followed shook even seasoned veterans. The first volley tore through the carrier's escorts, fragments scattering like burning hail. Missiles screamed through space, their detonations throwing orange reflections across the dark. Enemy crews scrambled, alarms blaring through their decks, the acrid stench of fire choking their lungs. Human fighters swarmed like hornets, their pilots crying into comms with voices cracking under strain. For Caraway! For Tanith! The Council carrier staggered, its shields buckling, explosions ripping open its flanks. For a moment, victory seemed within reach, but reinforcements poured in, and the human flotilla was forced to retreat, half its ships shattered, crews spilling oxygen into the void. When they returned, silence greeted them. There was no cheering, no celebration, only exhausted men dragging themselves through corridors that reeked of scorched steel and burned circuitry. Voss addressed them in person. His voice carried no triumph, only hard truth. We cannot match them in numbers. We cannot stop their advance everywhere. But we can show them that every step toward Earth is a graveyard waiting to swallow them. They think exile has weakened us. Let them see instead that it has forged us into something that endures fire and rises again. The men listened, their faces etched with grief, yet in their eyes flickered the embers of belief. They would fight again, even knowing the cost. Voss returned to his command chair, the leather still warm from his absence, and stared at the map filling the laser plasma display. Red markers spread like a disease across the rim, yet his jaw clenched with determination. Attrition had carved them raw, but it had not broken them. And until the last breath left his chest, he would ensure the Council understood that stripping Earth of recognition had not erased its will. It had sharpened it into a weapon. Send me the names of those willing to die for this. No volunteers without conviction. Director Keith Morin's voice rang across the small tactical chamber where shadows pooled at the edges, and the air carried the sting of recycled filters pushed beyond their limits. Commodore Voss stood beside him, arms folded, eyes fixed on the heads-up display that showed the slowly rotating image of a Council courier ship. The vessel was sleek, silver plates shimmering with the glow of its reactor wake, a ship meant for speed and secrecy rather than war. Within its holds were the encrypted archives of the High Assembly, messages that passed unfiltered between the most powerful hands in the galaxy. To capture it was to risk everything. To ignore it was to abandon their only chance of exposing why humanity had truly been cast out. Morin leaned closer to the display, his voice taut with urgency. Intercepting this ship will not end the war, but it will give us what bullets cannot: truth. They think our weapons are crude. Let us prove our words can destroy more than their fleets. Voss's jaw tightened, the tension creasing deeper lines into his face. Truth only matters if we can live long enough to wield it. What you ask will cost lives. Morin's gaze sharpened, his fingers tapping once against the console. Lives are already spent each day in ambushes and raids. At least here they fall buying us a weapon stronger than attrition. Give me the men, Commodore. There was no roar of agreement, no dramatic gesture. Voss simply nodded, the decision heavy enough to crush and yet necessary. Then choose carefully. I want fighters who understand what sacrifice means, not dreamers chasing martyrdom. The mission began at the edge of the Marethus Rift, where the courier was expected to pass unescorted. A small human strike team waited aboard a disguised freighter, the scent of sweat and lubricants filling its cramped corridors, air thick with anticipation. Each man adjusted his gear with hands that trembled, not from fear, but from the knowledge that half of them would not return. Inside the drop bay, Lieutenant Karan checked the seals on his suit, the hiss of locking clamps cutting through the murmured prayers of those beside him. He turned to Morin, who stood in silence, the pale glow of overhead lamps cutting shadows across his features. "Director," Karan said, his voice stripped of hesitation, "if I die today, make sure my family knows I didn't fall in vain." Morin placed a hand on the man's shoulder, his grip firm, steady. "If you die, Lieutenant, it will be because you carried the weight no one else could. That is not in vain. That is legacy." The freighter approached the courier with transponders masked as civilian signals. At the moment of contact, the strike team launched in boarding pods, their hulls vibrating with the strain of sudden acceleration. The sound was deafening, metal groaning, bolts rattling loose, the vibration crawling through their bones. Then came the jarring impact as pods slammed against the courier's outer hull, drills tearing into plating, sparks showering inside cramped compartments. The doors blew open with a violent hiss of pressure, and men surged through with rifles ready, their boots clanging against unfamiliar decks. The corridor reeked of burning insulation where charges had blasted entry. Alarms howled through the ship, flashing crimson lights painting the walls in strobing fury. Alien crew rushed to respond, their guttural shouts echoing through the narrow passages, weapons raised. The clash erupted in a storm of gunfire, the thunder of impacts deafening in the enclosed space. Human soldiers pressed forward, every step paid for with blood. Corin fell with a cry, his chest plate shattered, yet his last act was to pull a pin and roll a charge into a cluster of enemies, his body thrown back by the blast. Morin's voice cut through the comms, steady even as chaos raged. "Push to the data core. Every second matters." They fought hand over hand, boots slipping on scorched flooring, eyes stinging from smoke, ears ringing with the endless percussion of battle. By the time they reached the core chamber, half their number lay scattered in silent heaps across the corridors behind them. The survivors tore open the chamber doors, faces illuminated by the blue glow of the archive banks. The sight struck them with awe, even amid carnage. Rows of crystalline storage towers thrumming with light, holding secrets that could fracture empires. Technicians worked with frantic speed, connecting drives, overriding alien locks with stolen codes. Sparks bit at their fingers, the tang of overheated circuits filling their throats. "We have fragments," one cried, voice breaking from both triumph and terror. "Not everything, but enough. Transactions, orders, correspondence, proof of manipulation." Then the alarms shifted pitch, a deep resonance that meant reinforcements were cutting through bulkheads. Blaster fire tore into the chamber, walls shuddering under impact. Men shouted, rifles spat fire, and one by one they fell. Morin himself grabbed a rifle, covering the last technician as files finished copying. The man turned, thrusting the drive into Morin's hand before a beam cut through his chest, dropping him lifeless at Morin's feet. "Extraction now!" Morin barked, dragging survivors toward the pods. Explosions thundered in pursuit, the smell of scorched flesh haunting every breath. When the pods tore free of the courier, their hulls blistered with fire, only a handful remained alive to feel the brutal impact of re-entry into the freighter's bay. The freighter limped away under covering fire, its hull scarred, its compartments filled with the groans of wounded. Morin staggered into the command deck, uniform torn, blood streaking his face, but his hand clutched the drive as though it were salvation itself. Voss waited on the main screen, his figure stern and unyielding, but when his eyes met Morin's, they softened with unspoken acknowledgement of the cost. "How many?" Voss asked. Morin swallowed, his throat raw, his voice a rasp. "Half, maybe less. But they gave us this." He raised the drive into view. "Proof, enough to ignite the cracks they've been hiding." For centuries, the chamber behind Voss was silent. Every officer watching that small fragment of hope carried at such terrible expense. Voss's reply was neither triumphant nor mournful, but steady as iron. "Then their deaths have meaning. Begin analysis immediately. The war is no longer fought with only guns. It will be fought with the truth they fear most." The connection ended, leaving Morin to collapse into a chair, the drive warm in his palm, the echoes of dying men still ringing in his ears. He whispered a vow to the silence, not to the council, not even to Earth, but to the ghosts of those who had fallen in corridors lit with crimson alarm. Your blood will not fade into numbers. It will burn cities. Release nothing at once. Feed it drop by drop, like poison in their veins. Director Keith Morin's command broke the stillness of the War Council chamber. The surviving officers who had endured the infiltration mission sat across from him, their uniforms torn, their faces hollow from grief and exhaustion. Commodore Ryland Voss stood silent at the far end of the table, the heads-up display behind him casting the room in shifting light, its surface filled with fragmented lines of data extracted from the stolen courier. The drive still lay on the table between them, scarred from battle but alive with secrets. Morin leaned forward, his eyes dark and unflinching. We've combed through the fragments. These files show contracts signed in blood, tax routes manipulated, colonies destabilized, all orchestrated by the Council's own High Assembly. We are not their threat. We were their scapegoat, their diversion while they plundered their own people. Brass hands clenched against the edge of the table until his knuckles turned pale. If this is true, why not show it all? Send every file to every world tonight. Let the Council burn. Morin's reply was a rasp, sharpened by conviction. Revolutions don't ignite with a single spark. They catch from embers, fed carefully, until flames consume everything. Release too much, and they will claim forgery, drown us in propaganda. Release it piece by piece, and their own citizens will demand answers. That is how we win. Voss finally spoke, his voice carrying across the chamber like steel dragged against stone. Then it begins now. Choose the first strike. The first leak was subtle. Shipping logs showing food convoys diverted away from famine-struck colonies toward Council core worlds, their holds packed with luxuries rather than relief. Within days, protests broke out across starving districts. Anger spilled into the streets, banners raised against leaders who had promised protection but delivered only deprivation. The air filled with chants, the smell of burning cloth as crowds lit effigies of their governors. The crash of glass from buildings stormed by their own citizens. Weeks later, another fragment emerged. Minutes of High Assembly meetings revealing entire border conflicts staged as justification for security tariffs. Colonies that had lost thousands in wars discovered they had been sacrificed for nothing more than profit. Soldiers refused orders, officers mutinied, veterans tore the insignia from their uniforms in full view of recording cameras. The sight spread faster than any virus, carried across black markets and whispered in every tavern on forgotten worlds. Inside the war chamber, the tension grew heavier with each leak. Marek read reports aloud, his voice struggling to balance between triumph and horror. There are riots on Velos Prime, dock workers refusing to service council ships. Their fleet resupply is already delayed. He paused, eyes darting to the next update. And at Caltheron, half a garrison abandoned their posts after hearing the broadcast. Brask exhaled a laugh that carried no mirth, only disbelief. We're cutting them apart with words. I never thought I'd see it. Morin shook his head, his expression grave. Not words, truth. Truth is more lethal than any cannon, because once revealed, it cannot be buried again. Yet with every victory came consequence. Council fleets turned savage in their repression, bombarding rebellious colonies, their weapons scorching entire districts. The smell of charred ruins and the cries of the homeless filled transmissions that reached Earth's channels. The Council tried to crush dissent, but each act of brutality was recorded, smuggled out, and replayed on every world where discontent already festered. Families wept on screen, bodies dragged from rubble, commanders justifying atrocities with hollow rhetoric. Each image was another nail hammered into the coffin of their legitimacy. Late one evening, Voss sat with Morin in the dim quiet of his private quarters. A single lamp cast a cone of amber light across the desk, where reports lay stacked like tombstones. Outside the viewport, stars drifted indifferent. Voss's voice carried the rasp of weariness. Every file we release saves us, but it condemns millions elsewhere. Their worlds burn under retaliation. How many innocents must we sacrifice to collapse their tyranny? Morin's reply was heavy, deliberate. In war, silence kills more than words. If we stop, they will finish us in isolation. If we continue, others will rise beside us. Their rage is the price of our survival and of their freedom. We are not executioners, Commodore. We are messengers. They choose how they respond. Voss closed his eyes briefly, the image of Caraway Station flashing again in memory. Children dragged through airlocks, the shouts of desperate parents. When he opened them, they blazed with resolve. Then let the messages spread. Let every world see what we have seen. By the third month, the council was fracturing. Entire trade guilds declared neutrality. Border systems refused tax shipments. On 3 different worlds, governors were lynched in public squares, their names cursed for betrayal. The once immovable authority of the council was crumbling under the weight of truth, seated by human hands. But for all their progress, Earth paid dearly. The blockades strangled convoys, and every ambush drained fleets further. Hospitals overflowed with wounded, corridors filled with the coppery sting of blood and the sterile bite of disinfectant. Pilots walked through halls with haunted eyes, their uniforms scorched, their laughter brittle. Entire families mourned without graves, their loved ones lost to space where recovery was impossible. Still, morale did not collapse. If anything, the leaks became oxygen for resolve. Men whispered in bunk rooms about alien colonies rising against their masters, about council troops refusing to fire on their own neighbors. Each fragment of rebellion was a spark of strength, reminding them that humanity was not alone in defiance. One night, as the command staff gathered for a briefing, a message broke through. A council fleet had mutinied at the edge of Velos, its commander denouncing the assembly live on an open channel, declaring he would no longer spill blood for liars. The recording played across the laser plasma display, his face lined with fatigue, his voice trembling with both fear and conviction. I served this council my entire life. I believed in order, but order without justice is rot. I will not serve rot. Silence filled the chamber when the recording ended. Voss rose, his posture tall, his voice carrying weight that pressed into every man present. This is the beginning of their end, not by our guns, but by their own betrayal of those they swore to protect. We have given them sight. They are tearing themselves apart. Morin's lips curved in something between a smile and a grimace. Information spreads faster than fleets, and once seen, it cannot be unseen. Outside, the council prepared its response. If information had become humanity's weapon, then overwhelming force would be theirs. The order was given in the High Assembly. The largest armada ever assembled would strike at Sol itself. And in the quiet after that decision, the galaxy waited to see if Earth's gamble with truth would survive the fire that was coming. Every fleet within striking range is converging. Their plan is nothing less than annihilation. The words carried through the command chamber of Earth's flagship Resolute as the heads-up display illuminated with shifting markers. Red icons multiplied until they filled half the projection, each representing a council warship racing toward Sol. The room carried the stale bite of overworked ventilation and the faint tang of scorched steel from long hours of combat readiness. Officers leaned forward in silence, the glow of the display painting hard lines across their faces. No one needed explanation. The largest armada in recorded history was moving against a single world. Commodore Rylan Voss stood at the center, his shadow stretching. Long across the floor, his eyes followed the enemy's advancing symbols, his jaw tense with unspoken calculations. Finally, he addressed his staff. We cannot stop them head-on. We cannot outrun them. What remains is to break them apart, piece by piece, until their will fractures before ours does. Commander Brass's voice rumbled from the side, raw with fatigue. Then we fight not for territory, not even for victory, but for survival. If we fall, Earth falls. Voss turned to him, his voice steady. If we fall, Earth learns how to stand without us. But we are not finished yet. Orders cascaded through the fleet. Stations powered their defenses until the decks trembled beneath the strain. Civilians were evacuated into underground shelters, their frightened cries muffled by layers of concrete as soldiers herded them downward. Families clutched one another, the scent of sweat and fear filling the tunnels, prayers whispered in dozens of languages. Above ground, men strapped into fighters, hands trembling against worn controls, mouths dry from the anticipation of combat. The metallic taste of adrenaline clung to their tongues. When the Council Armada arrived, it blotted the skies with fire. From Earth's surface, civilians staring upward saw streaks of light spreading across the heavens, like veins of molten silver, each flare a ship descending to tighten the noose. From orbit, the enemy filled the displays, their formations perfect, their confidence absolute. "Contact in the 60 seconds, Marek reported, his voice cracked but controlled. Voss gripped the rail before him, his knuckles white. "Engage defenses, deploy the outer rings, make them believe we are weaker than we are." The first volley struck, Council cruisers raining bombardment across Earth's orbital stations. Explosions tore across blackness, fragments scattering into glittering shards. Human crews screamed through comms, smoke choking their throats, alarms shrieking as compartments vented atmosphere. Firefighters dragged wounded men through corridors that reeked of scorched polymers, the groan of tortured bulkheads drowning their footsteps. Then came the counterstroke. From asteroid belts seeded weeks earlier, hidden batteries roared to life. Tungsten slugs tore through the void, striking enemy frigates broadside. One ship split apart in a blossom of fire, scattering wreckage into spiraling arcs. Fighters launched from disguised platforms, their trails streaking across the dark, missiles chasing enemy carriers. The suddenness of the strike threw the Council formation into disorder. Brask leaned over the tactical station, shouting above the noise. They didn't expect the mines to wake up. Flank wings are pulling back. But the reprieve was brief. Reinforcements surged forward, pounding Earth's defenses with relentless barrages. Human losses mounted, frigates collapsing under fire, orbital habitats disintegrating, communications towers silenced. Medbays, filled with screams, the coppery tang of blood thick in the air as medics worked frantically under flickering lights. On the bridge of Resolute, Marek's voice cracked through static. "Outer ring is failing. We've lost 27 ships in 10 minutes. Voss forced his tone calm, knowing panic would unravel them faster than enemy fire. "Hold the second line. Withdraw the crippled. Every minute we delay them is another they doubt themselves." The second line ignited as hidden stabilizers activated, tearing artificial rifts in the void. Council squadrons plunged into sudden pockets of distortion, their formations splintered as gravity bent and twisted beneath them. Human strike groups lunged into the chaos, targeting command vessels. Explosions rippled through the battlefield, fragments slamming against hulls, vibrations rattling every rib and tooth of those aboard. Then Morin's gambit struck. As enemy officers scrambled to coordinate, intercepted recordings broadcast across their tactical channels. Faces of alien generals filled their displays, voices admitting corruption, documents flashing across their screens. Mid-battle, commanders saw their leaders confessing to theft, to staged wars, to betrayals against their own citizens. The psychological blow was staggering. Crews hesitated, orders contradicted, mistrust spreading faster than fire. One alien captain appeared on the comms, his voice breaking through the static. "I will not die for thieves." His warship turned its guns not on Earth, but on its own formation, carving destruction into allies before being obliterated. Panic rippled outward as discipline collapsed. Still, the cost to humanity was horrific. The decks of Resolute shook under impact, consoles sparking, the air thick with the stench of burning insulation. Voss steadied himself, his ribs aching where the railing had struck him. Officers coughed through smoke, eyes red from strain, yet none abandoned their posts. "Commodore!" Brask shouted, voice hoarse. "We can't hold much longer." Voss's gaze locked on the display, where the once perfect armada was unraveling into chaos. "Then hold long enough for them to destroy themselves." The Council fleet, once a spear of unity, was now a storm of betrayal. Squadrons fired upon one another, some fleeing outright, others surrendering to the black. Earth's battered defenders pressed the advantage, not with triumph, but with grim determination. Fighters pursued retreating vessels, torpedoes slamming into their flanks, enemy screams flooding intercepted comms. When the final Council flagship fractured, Breaking into two burning halves that tumbled across the void, silence spread through Earth's channels. Survivors wept openly, their tears streaking through soot. Medics carried the wounded across blood-slicked decks, the air thick with disinfectant and smoke. Voss looked across the ruin and finally lowered his voice to a whisper only his bridge crew heard. We have not won. We have endured, and that endurance has ended them. The battlefield burned, fragments drifting in every direction, the light of shattered fleets reflecting like dying embers across the stars. Earth remained, scarred but alive, while the Council's greatest force had torn itself apart under the weight of its own lies. Report every world in open revolt. The words came from a Council officer on a captured channel, his voice cracking with disbelief as his fleet limped away from Seoul. Commodore Ryland Voss listened in silence aboard Resolute, the bridge still shrouded in smoke, deck plates streaked with the stains of fire, suppressant, and blood. Around him, his crew worked with trembling hands, sealing ruptured conduits, lifting the wounded onto stretchers, whispering the names of the dead as though speaking them aloud kept them alive for a moment longer. The battle was over, but the war was still echoing across the galaxy. Marek staggered up from his console, one arm bound in a sling, eyes red from exhaustion. Commodore, intercepted transmissions confirm it. Riots on Velos. Caltheron has declared independence. The High Assembly can't even enter their own chamber without armed escorts. Brask, his face cut and bruised, leaned heavily against the rail, his voice carrying the gravel of a man who had seen too much death. They wanted Earth erased. Instead, they've erased themselves. Tell me, sir, when history writes of this day, will it call us victors or survivors? Voss turned slowly, meeting the eyes of every officer on the bridge. His reply was steady, heavy with finality. Both. We survived what should have ended us, and in doing so, we ended them. The Council is finished, not by our conquest, but by their own corruption dragged into light. Outside the viewport, the battlefield drifted in silence. Burned hulks of alien ships rotated slowly, sparks flashing faintly as oxygen bled from ruptures. Human ships, scarred and limping, moved among the wreckage, pulling survivors from pods, retrieving bodies where they could. The stench of scorched composites and burned cloth still clung to corridors, carried on every breath. Later, in the assembly hall beneath Earth's fortified capital, the surviving commanders gathered. The room still smelled of dust shaken from its beams during bombardment. Civilians filled the balconies, faces gaunt but eyes burning with pride. Voss walked to the podium, his shoulders straight though his body screamed with fatigue. The hall quieted until one could hear the shuffle of boots, the creak of benches, the distant cry of a child carried in the arms of a mother who had lost everything but still refused to leave. Voss began, his voice raw, stripped of flourish. We were cast out as dangerous, unworthy, reckless. The Council thought exile would weaken us until we begged for chains. Instead, it forced us to become stronger than their order, because survival allowed no other choice. They came with the largest fleet the stars have ever seen, and that fleet is gone. Not because we were mightier, but because their lies devoured them from within. We did not build their downfall. We revealed it, and they collapsed under the weight of their own rot. He paused, eyes sweeping the crowd. Some wept openly. Others sat stiff-backed, clutching the hands of neighbors. Soldiers in torn uniforms stood at attention, each one carrying scars that told stories too heavy for words. We have bled more than we believed possible. Families will never see their sons again. Worlds will never rebuild to what they once were. But understand this, Earth remains. Our colonies remain, and we are no longer subject to decrees of a council that no longer exists. Morin, sitting near the front, raised his head, voice hoarse but cutting through the hall. Their empire did not fall to fleets. It fell to the truth. That truth carried by men who died unseen in corridors far from home. We owe them everything. The hall erupted in applause, not joyous but defiant, a thunder of hands and boots echoing through stone walls. It was the sound of a people refusing erasure. In the days that followed, transmissions spread across the stars. Former council worlds declared independence, their leaders toppled by angry citizens. Fleets once sworn to protect the assembly fractured, commanders swearing loyalty only to their own systems. Trade guilds split apart, Old alliances vanished. The great order that had bound the galaxy for centuries dissolved, not into chaos, but into a new uncertainty, where Earth was no longer a junior member, but a survivor too dangerous to ignore. On the bridge of Resolute, Brask joined Voss one last time, gazing at the stars beyond. His voice was softer than usual, stripped of its usual gravel. "What now, Commodore? Do we seize the throne they abandoned?" Voss's reply came without hesitation. "Number empires rot, councils corrupt. We did not fight to rule, we fought to live free. Let the galaxy rebuild itself as it will. Let them remember only that when they tried to erase us, they erased themselves." Brask exhaled slowly, the corners of his mouth twitching into something like a smile. "Then the lesson is written in fire." "Yes," Voss said quietly, almost to himself. His eyes lingered on the drifting wreckage, the silent testimony of a fallen order. They banished Earth from the Council, and now the Council no longer exists. The words hung in the air, not boastful, not triumphant, but final. Earth's story was no longer one of exile, it was one of endurance that shattered an empire. And in that truth lay the warning carried across every star. Humanity, stripped of recognition, had reshaped history by refusing to die. If this story gave you chills, hit that subscribe button. Now we want to hear from you. If you had command of Earth's fleet at Sol, what strategy would you use to break the largest armada in history? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. Thanks for watching Stellar HFY, where strategy wins wars before they're ever fought. See you in the next story.